Good morning, everybody. Give it another moment or so. Hope you've had a nice weekend and had that little story out of Austin, Texas. Arab Muslim. From Britain yet? Well, what do they call it? Islamophobia? Complaining about, there's all this political rhetoric about Islamophobia, very, very overblown by the media. It's a very minor thing. Muslims are favored as opposed to different groups. They're part of the intersectional special groups that get special treatment, special favor at the schools and universities. There are professors, unbelievably anti-Semitic, really hateful against Jews. And they say things, if Jews would say the same things as professors about Muslims, Jews would be fired left and right, be fired like flies. And instead, you've got Muslims running wild, anti-Semitic. Remember that guy who shot up, was it Fort Worth or somewhere in Texas, an American military base, and Obama called it workplace violence instead of Islamic terrorism? That's what we're up against. And you can't even call it Islamic terrorism under certain administrations. You have to kind of just wink at each other and listen to all of this garbage about Islamophobia. The fact is that the worst documented religious hatred in this country is anti-Semitism. The FBI data, they don't change the data. Maybe one day they're going to change the data too. But right now, they don't change that data. And every year, it's not even close. There's no other group in this country that faces as much religious hatred, bigotry, and discrimination as Jews. It's in the data. There's the shooting to Texas just added to the data, okay? And you can't call it when it's regular Muslims, and you can't call it when it's Black Muslims. But whether it's Black Muslims or that Black Israelite group that shot the kosher store in Jersey City and murdered a guy in Muncie, New York, can't call it by its, but it's there. At least if we call it, somebody's got to call it by its name. Got to call it. And you have to recognize it. And so it goes from both sides. It comes from the left wing, it comes from the right wing. Like Pittsburgh was from the right wing. And that maniac who shot up Poway 2 years ago, so he was from the right wing. And now you got it from the left wing. We're on both sides. It's a unique thing Jews have to face. That the hatred for Jews is so irrational that it's the one thing that brings left wing and right wing together. It's the one thing that brings white extremists and Black supremacists together. Which brings us to Megillah Esther. Okay. So we have, okay. Let's begin. Yeah, I see. I haven't read exactly what Biden said, but what I'll say for Biden, I met Biden many years ago. I mean, many years ago, in the 1980s. It was 30 years ago. I was national director of the Likud United States. That's the group that raises money for and supports those Israeli political people affiliated with Likud. In those days, it was Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir, and then it was Ariel Sharon before he went crazy and gave up Gaza and Gush Katif. And nowadays would be people like Netanyahu. And I was the national director, used to fly around the country. I was very young for the post. In my early 30s, right before I moved to Israel with my family. And so I used to fly around the country and I'd go with Prime Minister of Israel. And on one occasion, at our annual convention, it was my job to put together the convention and get the speakers. And it was easy to get Republicans to speak. It wasn't as easy, but back in the 80s, you could get a Democrat or two who would even speak at the Likud. And that year, I was able to get Joe Biden. So I got to meet Joe Biden, talk to him, talk to his people. And I came away from it, I think we all did. And he understood we're the Menachem Begin people. We're not the labor socialist Marxists like Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan and Yitzhak Rabin. We're the proud Jews. And we made very, very clear. And he knew, because we wanted him to know his audience. We didn't want him to come think he's talking to the Marxists like Golda Meir and Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres and Moshe Dayan. He's talking to Jews that are not giving up land. And he made a speech that was about as far as a Democrat could go in that direction. Very, very, very good speech. And what came away from it is, yeah, if he ever would be in power, nobody dreamt he would be, he'll be among those that pressure Israel to give up land. But he is the best of them. He has something for Israel in his heart. It's from his father. Something about the way his Irish father reared him with a certain love for Israel. And he has a thing for Israel. So again, he's in a political environment where everybody around him expects him to pressure the kishkes out of Israel. But Biden is the last of the Democrats from the old world, from the John F. Kennedys and Hubert Humphrey, Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He's the last of that generation that grew up in the 60s and 70s who has a thing for Israel, who watches the movie Exodus and watches Paul Newman, who after all plays a socialist Haganah guy who's anti-Irgun, but nevertheless is proudly pro-Israel. That's why a year ago, when Israel found herself at war with Hamas, and you have people on the Democrat side that was saying, now that we're in power, let's cut off all weapons and supplies to Israel and let's condemn Israel in the middle of the war. You may remember, Biden would not speak out against Israel for the first week. And then it wasn't like Trump or a different Republican who'd stand by, or even George Bush II, who stood by Israel through its war. But what Biden did that was powerful is by keeping his mouth shut for a week, he gave Israel a chance during that week to completely knock out the Hamas installations where they shoot their rockets from. You know, they hide their rockets in hospitals and in schools, schoolyards, and in residential apartment buildings. They put their rocket launchers on the rooftops of residential apartment buildings. They're actually forcing Israel to choose between getting blown up, getting bombed by rockets, or to take out apartment buildings, which is going to kill Arabs. They don't care. They don't care if they cause their own people, 1,000, 10,000 of their people to die, as long as the pictures, as long as the Associated Press and the United Press International pick up the pictures and it makes Israel look bad. That's all they want. And so Israel finds herself in a very tough position fighting these people because you have to take out the launchers, which means you have to bomb schoolyards and hospital buildings. And so it was very powerful that Biden just kept quiet for a week. By the time he was ready to give in to his left wing and start telling Israel, you can't do this anymore, Israel had accomplished what it had to. Also, what's happened in the last 15, 20 years, and the terrorists now have to figure this out. In the last 15 years, just because of technology, Israel has developed weapons that are pinpoint, more so than ever before. So 15 years ago, if you had to take out launchers, Hamas terrorist rocket launchers in a schoolyard, you might accidentally hit the school building. If you tried to take it out in the hospital backyard, you might hit the hospital. And then Hamas would be sure that all the Western media take a look. Israel knocked out an ICU, intensive care unit in the hospital. They weren't aiming for the hospital, but the shrapnel of the bomb hit the hospital. Israel now is so capable of pinpoint targeting. They actually, if you put a rocket launcher right up against the wall of the hospital, they can actually take out the launcher without damaging the hospital buildings, which is something Hamas wasn't ready for. It really came home. For those of you who remember, around 3 years ago, there was an Arab terrorist who was the head of not Hamas, but the Islamic Jihad, which is another of their agencies in Gaza. And while Hamas was resisting starting any kind of trouble at that moment in time for their own strategic reasons, this guy who was in charge of Islamic Jihad, he wanted to start trouble. And he was sending rockets into southern Israel. And one day, you may or may not recall, it was about 3 years ago, Israel took him out. And the way they took him out, it's mind-blowing. They actually, from way up in the sky, shot a missile that actually went into the third floor window, into his bed, and blew him up in his bed. And the missile from it, it didn't even destroy the rest of the building. It was almost like a cartoon. Remember the Looney Tunes cartoons? And it would be like, I don't know, like a Bugs Bunny is going to get Elmer Fudd, or they're going to get the Roadrunner, and you'd see a missile go down, and then just as it hits the roof, it stops, turns around, and goes through into the third. That's what they have now. So we'll see what happens with that. Now, how did they fight Jews in the old days? Back to Megillah Esther. Let's take a look at some things. And for today, we have to begin actually with a little bit of background. Last week, Baruch Hashem, we had a wonderful class in the first chapter. And this week, we're going to back it up a little bit to set some background and then jump back to where we left off. Let's understand who we're dealing with. The nearest country, our problem was Babylonia and Persia. Babylonia is mostly modern-day Iraq. Now, what happened was, way back when, before Megillah Esther, Nebuchadnezzar's great-grandfather, so that's 3 generations earlier. This is the time the Jews were secure in Eretz Israel under the leadership of King Chizkiyahu, Hezekiah. The Navi tells us, we're told in Malachim Aleph, 1 Kings, that, actually 2 Kings, that Nebuchadnezzar's great-grandfather, he hasn't been born yet, so no one's talking about Nebuchadnezzar, but it talks about the king of Babylonia as a much weaker country. Israel was the world power at the time in the Middle East and possibly in the whole world. And he visited King Chizkiah, and Chizkiah showed him around and showed him the wealth of Israel, the royal jewels, literally the wealth in the Beit HaMikdash. Our rabbis tell us this was a big mistake because he placed in the man's mind and in the legacy of Babylonia that the Jews are rich. The Jews have a temple that has gold and silver and copper, and wow. And that placed in the national consciousness, someday if we ever conquer these people, we're gonna be sure before we leave to take that wealth with us. Don't want to leave that behind. Had no idea they're that rich. Well, that king sent a message to King Chizkiah. And the message was, and I'm saying it exactly as he said it, peace be unto King Chizkiah, peace be unto Chizkiah's God, and peace be unto Jerusalem. The rabbis tell us that after the messenger, again, hear the way I said it, peace be unto King Chizkiah, peace be unto Chizkiah's God, peace be unto Jerusalem. The rabbis tell us that after the messenger left for Israel with that message, Nebuchadnezzar's great-grandfather, the king, sent faster messengers to stop the first messengers, catch them before they get to Israel, bring them back. I want to change the message. He changed the message from peace be unto King Chizkiah, peace be unto the God of Israel, peace be unto Jerusalem. Change the message. Peace be unto the God of Jerusalem. Peace be unto King Chizkiah. Peace be unto Jerusalem. He put God first. The rabbis tell us because he did that, two things. Since his message was in 3 steps, to God, to Chizkiah, to Jerusalem, we Jews, when we pray to God, are supposed to take 3 steps back and 3 steps forward at the beginning of the Amidah and at the end of the Amidah, beginning of the Shemona Esrei and the end of the Shemona Esrei. That's one of the reasons. Because he showed deference to the God of Israel. In the 3-step message, we show that deference by taking 3 steps back. And secondly, he was blessed that his son, someone was going to tear down the Beit HaMikdash. And he was blessed, paradoxically, that if the day ever comes that the Jews would deserve it, that his son, his great-grandson, would be the one. Because his great-grandson would be the great world conqueror, because he showed deference to God. Okay, so we were good with Babylonia until we no longer were. And if you'll say to yourself, gee, Rabbi, that's kind of hard to picture that we could have such a good friendship and such a good alliance with a country, and yet this country would turn on us as our worst enemy? Well, we've lived through that. In the 1950s, the one Muslim country in the world that was friendly to Israel, and not only friendly, but one of Israel's most relied upon allies was Iran. The Shah of Iran was not only neutral, he was incredibly pro-Israel. They sent weapons, they sold weapons to Israel. They were one of Israel's biggest supporters, frankly, more so than the United States. If there was one country in the world on which Israel could rely and one ally, it was the Shah of Iran. And today, I don't have to tell you, it's the worst country in the world. It's the only country that says outright, explicitly, we will destroy Israel. We will obliterate her from the map. No one else says that. Even those that aspire to that don't say it. So we ourselves live in a time that we witnessed how the best country could turn into the worst country. Not surprising this happened with Babylonia. Now, when Nebuchadnezzar came, he wiped out the Beit HaMikdash. And it wasn't so much anti-Semitism. It was he was conquering countries. He wanted to be the great world power, like, I don't know, Napoleon. Okay? He just wanted to conquer. And he succeeded in conquering a heck of a lot. He took down Israel. He drove out the 3 remaining tribes. We are actually 13 tribes, you'll remember. I've taught it many times. Where if you count the tribe of Joseph, right, there are 12 sons of Yaakov, who was renamed by God Israel. So you have Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov or Yisrael. We're the children of Yaakov, Bnei Yaakov, also Bnei Israel, children of Israel. The reason we're known as the children of Israel, not the children of Abraham, is, as you know from the Abraham Accords, the Muslims also are the children of Abraham. It's not unique. It's not a name that's unique to us. The reason we're then not called Bnei Yitzchak, the children of Yitzchak, is that he also had his son, not only Yaakov, but Esav. And according to the rabbis, Esav is the progenitor of Rome and of Christianity. So the fact that there's children of Israel, that we Jews come from Yitzchak, so does Christianity. Consequently, although the Muslims, they stop with Abraham and Yishmael. So therefore, we're not known as Bnei Yitzchak, but we're known as Bnei Yaakov. We are known as the children of Jacob, because all of Jacob's children indeed are the Jewish children. You have Yehuda, you have Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Dan, Naphtali, and that's the first 6. Then you have Gad, Asher is 8, Yisachar, Zvulun is 10, and Yosef and Binyamin is 12. Now, those 12 tribes, at Yaakov on his deathbed, he took his 2 grandsons, Menashe and Ephraim, and said to them at the end of the book of Rashi, you will be to me as directly as if you, not only grandchildren, but as if you were my direct sons, from which we learn they also are designated as tribes. So sometimes we split up Yosef and refer to Menashe and Ephraim, such as during land apportionment, and that where we get 12 tribes. Sometimes when we're not talking about land apportionment, excuse me, so you have 12 tribes where Yosef is one of the 12. Okay. Now, what you have happened is that the Assyrians, Ashur, they exiled the 10 northern tribes, and that's the end of them, the 10 lost tribes. The remaining 3 tribes, Binyamin, Yehuda, and Levi, still were in the south, and when Nebuchadnezzar exiled us from our land, destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, but Nebuchadnezzar did not seek to destroy us as a people. What the Assyrians did, they sought to bring an end to us, as did the Romans. Just as the Romans renamed Eretz Yisrael Palestine, looking to give it the name of its previous occupants, the Philistines, Plishtim, from the Plishtim Palestine. There were no Arabs, Muslims, there were no, that's the 600s. Muhammad doesn't show up till 636. Nevertheless, the Romans sought to put an end to the Jewish connection to Eretz Yisrael. So did the Assyrians, Ashur, and they were successful. The Assyrians, by the way, are not the Syrians. In biblical times, the people today whom we call Syrians were the Arameans, Aram. Okay. So what you end up with is Babylonia was a mixed bag. On the one hand, they drove us out of Eretz Yisrael, destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, stole everything from the Beit HaMikdash, took all the wealth, the vessels and everything. And on the other hand, they allowed Jews to live well within Babylonia. They did not seek to completely eradicate the bond between the Jews and Eretz Yisrael. And they actually allowed certain people like Daniel to rise high in the government, as well as the 3 men who eventually were put into a fiery furnace and miraculously survived, as did Daniel when he was put into a lion's den, because anti-Jews within the government whispered terrible things about them to the Nebuchadnezzar, so he tried to have them executed, and each time God made a miracle, and the Jews were restored. By and large, Jews had it okay under Babylonia. Now, after Nebuchadnezzar died, first his son Evil Merodach became king, and things were okay. Then came Belshazzar. Belshazzar is the last of the Babylonian kings. What happened that made him the last? What happened is he had a big celebration in honor of his being a king. And at the celebration, he gave the word to bring forth the spoils that had been taken by his grandfather from the Beit HaMikdash. That not only was he celebrating, but they took out the vessels that they had stolen from the Beit HaMikdash. And this was fateful and brought an end to Belshazzar's life. Let's look at it as we look back, because this sets the framework for Achashverosh. Let's look back to Daniel. King Belshazzar. Belshazzar. That's how we have our name. Daniel is one of 2 or 3 books in the Bible written primarily in Aramaic. All the Bible, all the Tanakh is Hebrew. But there are about 3 or so exceptions, including Daniel, parts of Ezra and Nehemiah, that are in Aramaic, because that was the language the Jews spoke, because that's the language the non-Jews spoke in Babylonia. But it's written in Hebrew letters, just as if you were to transliterate Hebrew words to English, like Baruch Atah. So you'd write B-A-R-U-C-H, U-K-H, Baruch, B-A-R-U-K-H. So in the same way, Jewish Aramaic is the Aramaic language written in Hebrew letters. Belshazzar Malka Avad Lechem Rav. So Belshazzar the king made a massive banquet. Le Rav Ravon Alaf, for tens of thousands of nobles. Ulakabel Alpa Chamra Shatei. And he had thousands drinking wine, and he drank wine in the presence of thousands. Lekabel Alpa. Many of these Aramaic words are similar, not surprisingly, to Hebrew words because they're from the same region. It's like Italian is different from Spanish, which is different from French, but there are certain common roots in all the Romantic languages. Same way, there are some similarities of Hebrew and Arabic. Salam alaikum, shalom aleichem, other words like that. A lot of words. In the same way, a lot of Aramaic there's. So if you look at it like Malka, like Hebrew Melech, king, or Alpa, like Hebrew Elef, thousand. Okay, and some words are unique to that language. Chamra is Hebrew for yayin, is Aramaic for yayin, wine. Okay, so Belshazzar ordered that the gold and silver vessels that his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim should be brought so that his consorts and concubines could drink from them. Now, you don't mess around with stuff from the Holy Temple. Belshazzar Amar b'te'im chamrei la'itano lamoni dahava v'chaspa di hanpeik Nebuchadnezzar avoy. Dahava is like the Hebrew word silver. In Aramaic, adalid often replaces the Hebrew zayin. Dahava, zahav, gold. Kaspa, kesef, silver. So he ordered that they take out the gold and silver vessels that were taken from the Heichal of Yerushalayim, from the Heichal, from the Holy of Holies, the Ishton, like Lishtot in Hebrew, and you'll drink from it, the Malka, the king, the Rav Ravoni, his noblemen, and even his Shaglate and his Chinate, those with whom he had, let's say, physical, intimate relationships, the women like that. Excuse me a moment. So, as a result of that, God saw this act that he did, and they drank wine, praising their gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. And just then, amid this massive celebration, a hand, just a hand, think of a hologram. I can't describe it any other way. But think of a hologram hand showing up at a wall. There's no body, that is no body, only a hand, from the wrist down to the fingers, holding a writing utensil and writing on the wall. The fingers of a human hand, etzba'ot, right? Etzba is a finger. Etzba'an diyat enosh, that's man's hand, and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And it wrote, the king got, it says, Adayin Malkazi Avoi Shnoi, his face darkened. It's like, what is this? And it's a language, he didn't understand the meaning of the words. The words were written legibly, but he did not understand the full word's meaning. And so it says, like, his joints were loosened, his knees knocked together in terror and horror. Again, think of cartoons almost. And the king called loudly for all of his advisors and people who could, read tea leaves and tell the fortune and palm readers, exorcists. And he asked, somebody tell me what this is. Whoever can read this writing and tell me its meaning shall be clothed in purple, which was a big, big thing in those days, and wear a gold chain on his neck, and she'll be one of the top three, basically, in my inner court. Just as the president of the United States, who are the top three in America? I don't know. The vice president, let's stay out of politics with this vice president. There's like the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Treasury. You could pick, who do you think are the three most powerful people in America? Israel, there's the Prime Minister, also the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Okay. So he's going to give that to anyone who can explain Pishrei. Pishrei means to interpret, lifshor. Anyone who can explain the Ketava Dana, this writing. I'll give him all the Tahava, all the Zahav. I'll put it on Savre, on its Savar, on the neck. It'll be one of the Talat. The other Hebrew letter that is often switched in Aramaic is the Hebrew Shin for the Tav. So Talat in Aramaic is Shalosh in Hebrew, 3. Okay. So all the king's wise men came, but they couldn't make out the words. They could make out the letters, but not the vowels. You know, Hebrew's written without vowels, or you could have it without vowels. And they couldn't quite figure out the words. There was no verb, or maybe actually there were 4 verbs. There were no nouns, pronouns, adjectives, so they couldn't quite make it out. As a result, he got even more darkened in his face. And he was probably having more knee knocking, again, like a Looney Tunes cartoon. And he was really horrified. And so the queen is saying, calm down. There's a guy in this kingdom who really is a cut above, very much like in the story of Paro in ancient Egypt, where Yosef was pulled out of prison to help Paro divine the meaning of the 7 thin cows, that emaciated cows that consume the 7 fat cows, and the 7 stalks of grain that consume the. So we've got someone here in the kingdom, namely Daniel the Jew. So call him up. Seeing there's to be found in Daniel, who was known in the country by a different name as Belteshazzar. So there's Belshazzar and there's Belteshazzar. All right. So Daniel was, let's get that name, Belshazzar. Belshazzar. The king is King Belshazzar. Got that? He called him the same name. Belshazzar. Belshazzar. So he called him Daniel. The only thing is, Daniel's Belshazzar has a letter tet in it to distinguish. Belshazzar. One more time, Daniel was known as Belshazzar, and it has a tes in it, whereas the king's name was Belshazzar, without the tes. King called him Belshazzar. You want to know what that's like? That's like me with the last name Fischer. Whenever I'm, I have to call somebody and they're looking me up on the chart, or they're looking up my account and they can't find me, I already know it's because they're spelling Fisher without a C. Then you tell them, no, it's Fisher with a C, and the moron can't put the C in the right. It's just like F-I-C-S-C-A. So I had to learn how, when I call on the phone and I want them to find my account, I have to say, that's F-I-S, and then I have to have a pregnant pause, give some time to breathe, and then I say C-H. That always works. But if I simply say F-I-S-C-H, they look at F-I-C-S. You can't go to good help nowadays. But even crazier was a guy when I was a boy. There was a guy in shul, and his last name is Elephant. And everybody made fun of him. Everybody made fun of him. It got to the point, go figure. I mean, we were kids. But one day, it's like you learn he had his name legally changed. He couldn't take it anymore. So what does a Schmendrick do? He takes out the letter E in the middle of the name, changed his name from Elephant to Elphant. If you think that 9-year-old boys are no longer going to go, ah! all because he takes out an E in the middle of his name, let me tell you something, that doesn't work. He was still Elephant. So you got to, give me a break. Anyway, Daniel is the guy, and they brought him before the king. And we're going to refer to him as Daniel. That's how the Tanakh calls him, because that's his name. King said, Daniel, you're one of the exiles from Yehuda. Okay, now this is King Belshazzar. He's a son of Nebuchadnezzar. There's a debate whether he's a son or grandson. Most say he's a son. Let's get that list up. There we go. You had Nebuchadnezzar, his son Evil Merodach, who does not reign for long. Most understand Belshazzar is Evil Merodach's brother, namely Nebuchadnezzar's son. A few think he's the grandson. Okay. So he says, look, my father brought you Jews when he tore down Israel, destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, and brought you Jews to Babylonia. You're one of them from the Galuta. See again how Aramaic, how similar to Hebrew? Galut, Galuta. You may also know the word Galuta from the song we sing Friday nights, Karibon. There's a reference to bringing back the Jews from the Galut back to Eretz Yisrael. V'apek yatamech migo galuta hamech divachart mikol umahaya karibon olam v'omaya antu mahoka melech machaya. Just blended the two melodies. All right. So we continue. I've heard about you. You have the spirit of the gods. So I have my wise men and exorcists, and they have not been able to tell me what was just written on the wall. If you can answer me and make known its meaning, I will have you dressed in purple, which again in those days was the sign of wealth and royalty. And I'll put a big gold chain on your neck, and you'll be one of the three who rule this kingdom. So Daniel, he doesn't want to get in trouble, and he's not looking for power. And he knows if you get too much power, then people are out to get you. Says you may keep your gifts for yourself and give your presents to others. But I will read the writing on the wall for the kings. And by the way, if you've ever heard the expression, oh boy, they saw the writing on the wall, it comes from this chapter, chapter 5 of the book of Daniel. That when there's, as we're going to see here, when there's writing on the wall, which there literally is in chapter 5 of Daniel, the writing augurs something really, really bad coming up really soon. And that's how the term is used as an expression in modern day English. That, I don't know, let's say a politician does not do well in an election, and he can trace it, or she can trace it back to a particular decision. They could say, well, we saw the writing on the wall. Or if someone gets fired from work after making one or two mistakes and gets called into the office, the boss, the employer, and gets written up by human resources, well, a few weeks later, he's fired. There was the writing on the wall. It comes from this. Can you read the writing on the wall? And Daniel says, O king, most high, God bestowed kingship, grandeur, glory, majesty upon your father Nebuchadnezzar. And because of the grandeur that he with a capital H, God, bestowed upon Nebuchadnezzar, all the peoples and nations of every language trembled in fear of him. He was given everything. He put to death anyone he liked. He had that power, King Nebuchadnezzar. Whom he wished to let live, he let live. Whom he wished to raise high, whom he wished to bring low. Oh, but your father or grandfather, when he grew haughty and willfully presumptuous, God deposed him from his royal throne, and his glory was removed from him. Oh, I mean, he went mad. Nebuchadnezzar went mentally insane. He started walking around naked, acting like an animal, sort of the reverse of the Jungle Book. If you've ever seen the Jungle Book as a cartoon movie, or the year 2016 version with human beings, where the boy is raised by animals in the forest, or in the jungle, actually. He was the opposite.
He started as a human, and God drove him into the jungle. And he started acting like a beast. And for a period of time, he ate grass until he repented. Although he was acting physically like an animal, Nebuchadnezzar, as part of his punishment, God allowed him to retain his human intellectual capacity. And being unable to snap himself out of animal-like behavior, he repented and became humble and was restored to the throne. That's the story of Nebuchadnezzar. Now we're to his son or grandson, Belshazzar. You, Belshazzar, did not humble yourself, although you saw what happened when Nebuchadnezzar got too haughty. So God is finished with you. You exalted yourself against the God of heaven and had the temerity to bring the holy vessels, the gold and silver vessels of the Beit HaMikdash, for people, for women you slept with to drink from, even for your own highest ranking noblemen, but even your concubines and consorts, your sheglatech and your chenatach, your sheglatach and your chenatach, you dared. As a result, Badayin min kadamoi shaliach pasadiyada uchtav v'denarishim. God therefore made this hologram of a hand to appear and write as follows: Udenachta vadi rishim menei menei tekel ufarsin. On the wall, here's the 4 words. These are verbs. Menei menei tekel ufarsin. Menei lamnot is to count. Means counted, counted. Tekel, I told you earlier with the word talat, that Aramaic, they change a Hebrew shin to the tav. So tekal in Hebrew would be shakul. It's been weighed. You've been counted, you've been numbered, you've been weighed, ufar sin, and it shall be divided. This is the meaning. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. You have been weighed and found wanting. Your kingdom has been divided, given to the Medes, and the Persians, Lumadai Uparas. And you'll note all the references in chapter 1 and beyond in the book of Esther, references not to Babylonia, but to Madai and Paras. We have said that Vashti, I think I misspoke last week and said she was Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. She actually was she was the daughter of King Belshazzar. So she's regarded either as, if you believe Belshazzar was the brother of Avil Moradach, so that makes him the son of Nebuchadnezzar, and that would make Vashti granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. If your understanding is that Belshazzar was his grandson, then she was the great-granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, back to this. So Daniel is explaining, you've been found wanting for what you did, and your kingdom will be split between Madai and Paras, the Medes and the Persians. How did Belshazzar respond? He was a king. He was an honorable man. Instead of saying to Daniel, how dare you give me such a reed, he accepted the reading. At Belshazzar's command, they clothed Daniel in purple, placed the gold chain on his neck, and proclaimed that he's one of the 3 rulers. And that very night, Belshazzar was killed in his bed. So that was some prophecy, huh? And immediately, the kingdom was taken, indeed was split, and Daryavesh, the Medea, Darius the Mede, becomes the new king. And now let's take a quick look. We're not going to go chapter by chapter, but that's why I prepared the document here. He's known as Darius the First of Medea, King Daryavesh. And the deal is as follows. Darius becomes the king this marks the end of the Babylonian Empire. Babylonia will continue as a country, but it no longer will have the same greatness and world dominance with the death of Belshazzar. Darius takes control, which means he also gains control over Babylonia. He does not exile the Babylonians, but now they are subject to Medea, to the Medes. And he is followed by Koresh, in English, Cyrus. Persia, again, the kingdom of Babylonia was divided in half, its empire, between Medea and Persia. And after Darius's reign, Koresh, or Cyrus of Persia, defeats him, becomes the new leader. King Cyrus is blessed in the Bible as the king who allowed the Jews to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, the holy temple that Babylonia and Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed. And in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, among the last books of Tanakh, the Bible, we read about how the Jews begin rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash until the locals, the Samaritans, send word to King Cyrus that the Jews, you don't want to let them build the Beit HaMikdash. Because if they build the Beit HaMikdash, they will turn their loyalties away from you, the king. They'll stop paying taxes to you. They'll start moving back to the land of Israel and put their finances towards rebuilding the land of Israel and restoring their sovereignty. King Cyrus, contemplating the warnings from the Samaritans, issued an order, stop rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash. So he's a mixed figure in biblical Jewish history. The man who allowed the Jews to return, to rebuild, but stopped us. Likewise, you've heard the expression, the Good Samaritan. That's a Christian thing from the Christian Bible, what they call the New Testament, about a guy in Samaria, the Shomron, what the Arabs call the West Bank, who was good to Jesus. So the expression became like that's a compliment. This guy is a good Samaritan. Even in this year, like, 2022, if somebody would be driving by and would see someone's got an injury and pulls to the side of the road and calls 911 or helps, they compliment them and say, you're a good Samaritan. Well, Samaritans are bad people. All of our encounters with the Samaritans, the Shomronim, were very, very bad. Indeed, that's why there was one who stood out as the Good Samaritan. If you have 1 million people and one of them is known as the Good Samaritan, if everybody was a Good Samaritan, he wouldn't have to be called the Good Samaritan. He would just be called the Samaritan. They were bad people. Anyway, the Shomronim, the Samaritans, persuaded Koresh, Cyrus, to stop the rebuilding. Who came next after him? Our Achashverosh. That's why this conversation is happening in today's class. Achashverosh, who marries Esther, yada, 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 initially had been married to Vashti. Vashti was the daughter of Belshazzar, which means, as we said, she either was the granddaughter or great-granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. She carried that hatred for the Jews that ran in the family. Her dad was neutral, and eventually he honored Daniel, and of course Daniel's prophecy. That very night, Belshazzar is dead, and the kingdom splits. Achashverosh forbade Jews from rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash. When Cyrus no longer was in power, and Achashverosh enjoyed that power, and of course he's also Persian, so I kind of did not write it because it sort of went without saying, but let's pop it in there with my world famous typing skills. I can't get 7 keys without something wrong. All right. So Achashverosh, through his entire reign, forbade rebuilding. When the Jews said, look, can we resume? We just got started. He banned it. But his son, Darius II, Daryavich II, this one of Persia, the son of Achashverosh and of Esther, according to our tradition, that's the guy who allowed the Jews to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. And technically he's Jewish. He's got a Jewish mother. Something we don't talk about. But Achashverosh's son was Jewish. So that's the background in the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash. Achashverosh is an evil guy. I taught you this last week, the first week we started on Megillah. Although he's written up in the Megillah as a good guy. I explained to you last week, so I won't go into the same detail, but the idea was Mordechai had to eventually disseminate the Megillah through 127 provinces. It had to get through the king's censors. And if he had put in the censors, if he had put in the text how bad a guy he was, that he's a lowlife runt who gets drunk from his first sip of wine and ends up having his wife killed because he's drunk, and he's just has no control and told everybody to take his wife out naked, to display her naked to everybody. And he's an evil man who would not he wouldn't have gotten the book through. Achashverosh would not have let the book through. So you had fake news. There's your original fake news. That it's written in a way that should not be out and out lies, but it should be written in a way that if you know how to read carefully, you can figure it out. So how do you know that he ordered that she be brought out naked? Because it said she should be brought out with a crown on her head. So we understand as the queen, she always wore a crown on her head. So you read between the lines, bring her out with a crown, but nothing else. That's how that's inferred. And in the same way, his drunkenness is inferred that he was having everybody drink and drink and drink, and look what he did. And what she said about him and what she wrote to him, it does not spell it out, because he would not have wanted that in the book. It would not have gotten through censorship. But you can imagine it must have been something pretty heavy duty if his response was to have her executed. Not only punished for refusing to show up naked, but have her executed. So something strong. Okay. And that's what we learned last week, and that's where we're continuing from. And we also have this interesting paradox as we begin. So you go back to the book of Esther. He's trying to figure out, what do I do? Because she won't come to reveal herself. He gave the order while heavily drunk to bring Queen Vashti before the king and everybody else there wearing a royal diadem, her crown, but nothing else, to display her beauty. Again, the idea is her upper torso. That's what it's implying. So, all right, she's and Queen Vashti refused to appear at the king's command. So again, it's written in a way that will get past King Achashverosh, his censorship, beyond his censors. It's not a lie. It is the Bible. It's the Tanakh. We're not going to put in lies, but there's like an element of fake news that it doesn't exactly spell out all the details, but it tells us a little bit. Vatama'in, she's defying him. So when it says refuses, it's more like defying, but either way. And biyad hasari sim, something was handed. The word yad means hand. That means something had been handed. And if you read between the lines, notes were being handed. Notes were being handed back and forth. A note that says, come by the orders of the king naked to show your beautiful torso to everybody here. And she sent back a note. Tell the king he's a bum. He can't hold his wine. My grandfather, or great-grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, now that man could hold his wine. He could drink and drink and drink, and he did whatever he wanted. If he wanted to be calm, he was calm. If he wanted to have people executed, he had them executed. But he would have done the same thing if he were sober. Whereas this king, my husband, the stable boy, you can take the king out of the stable, but you can't take the stable out of the king. He's a bum. By Eksofa Melech Ma'od, and the king got so furious, Chamato Ba'arabo, that he was burning. Vayomer HaMelech L'Chachamim Yodei Hoitim, and he consulted with his advisors. And his 7 closest advisors were Karshana, Shetar, Admata, Tarshish, Meres, Marsna, and Memuchan. Now, these are the 7 officers of, we just learned about them, Paras Umadai, the 7 ministers of Persia and Medea. So, having the fall of Babylonia and the kingdom and empire now divided between Persia and Medea, both of those countries, their leaders were part of the greater Persian Empire, to the degree that he also consulted with people like that. So, of all of them, his closest friend and advisor, the rabbis tell us, was Memuchan. Memuchan, the rabbis tell us, was Haman. And the rabbis note something very interesting. When he's furious, this king, and he's drunk, and he wants to do something punitive against his wife, Vashti, he consults with his advisors, his closest friends. And what do they do? He's asking, Kedat mal asot malka Vashti, al asher lo astat marmar melech Achashverosh biyad Asarisim. What should I do to Queen Vashti for having refused to fulfill my order and the thing she sent back by hand, the note? Vayomer Memuchan, and is among the 7 of the different advisors, cabinet ministers of Persia and Medea, the highest rank and closest in friendship. Memuchan, otherwise Haman, he said, and this is where we left off last time, Lo aha melech levado of Vashti Malka. You got to look at this macroscopically. This is not just a personal insult of the queen to the king. This is going to create a gender issue, a feminism 2,000 years ahead of its time. Ki al kol hasurim v'al kol ha'amim asher b'chol minot hamelech Achashverosh. This is going to be a problem with women defying men throughout the kingdom and empire. Ki etzei davar malka kol nishim lavzot balehem beinehem. Once the word gets out, how the queen basically stuffs it in the king's face, it's going to open up the door for women all over the empire to stuff it in their husbands' faces. There will be no end of the scorn and provocation we're going to have to put up with the women. So you got to send a message now from the top echelon that any woman that acts up anything approaching this, finished. If the king will agree, because after all, we're giving advice to the king who has the power of life and death, so you got to say it like a lawyer standing in front of a judge. You always begin with the words, may it please the court. You don't just get up there and say, I'll tell you, judge, here's what I'm here for. Any lawyer that starts off that way is not properly trained. The first words always are, may it please the court. And that also tells the judge, I'm dealing with a respectable lawyer, or at least someone with basic training. So may it please the court. Imal melech tov, may it please your honor, the majesty, let a royal edict issue forth that is written in all the languages and sub-languages of Persia and Medea, that Vashti, the queen, did not show up, and therefore the king is replacing her with another woman. Again, it is understood. She's being executed. But the text will not be that explicit in order eventually to get through the censorship. Once the word gets out, once the word gets out, the king of what the king decided, then all the women in the kingdom will thereupon continue treating their husbands with a proper respect, whether they're important women and whether they're important husbands or whether they're lowlifes. As I mentioned, Denise taught me, it's not low lives with a V, but low lives. And the king did it. And he had these books, edicts sent throughout his 127 provinces in all the different languages. If you have 127 provinces, like nowadays, one would be French, one would be Italian, one would be Sanskrit, one would be Japanese, Chinese, Korean, English. Liot kol ish sorer beveito, umedaber kol shonamo. A lot of things out of it. Number one, the rabbis point out, fascinating, that the Megillah begins, that the king, when he's furious at his wife, doesn't quite know what to do. So he takes his highest advisors, and based on their advice, particularly the advice of Haman, he decides, good idea, and he has the queen killed. Later in the story, when he's angry at Haman, he seeks advice from the queen, who advises him to kill the top advisor and friend. And he goes, good idea. Let's have Haman. So here he seeks counsel from his cabinet member and friend Haman, what should I do with my queen? And later he seeks advice when drunk from his queen, what should I do with my Haman? In both cases, he gets the advice, kill him. And in both cases, he kills him. In the case of Vashti, it's not explicit whatever became of Vashti, but we know two things. This is between the lines. She's out of office, and we never hear of her again, which is a pretty good dead giveaway. A giveaway that she's dead. In the case of Haman, there are continued references after his being hanged that he's been hanged. Because why not? It does not necessarily reflect badly through the censorship that he had Haman killed. So these are insights. Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, also very powerful insight. He says this is important on another level too. Think of a king or a president, the head of government, Prime Minister of England, President of the United States, doesn't matter which president. Let's say the president issues executive orders. Obama, Trump, Biden. What do you expect executive orders to deal with? Forget politics. Whatever your politics is doesn't matter. But you expect if the president's going to hand down executive orders, it'll have to do with energy policy. Oh, I don't know. It could be Trump reduced regulations on the oil and fossil industry. Biden reversed some of Trump's regulations and made certain kind of exploration illegal again. Okay. Or maybe on the border. Trump issued his executive orders on the border. Obama and Biden, they issued their executive orders on. In other words, a president issues executive orders, and we're keeping out the politics, whether we have too many executive orders or not enough, on issues like energy policy, immigration policy, serious stuff. What is this executive order from the king? By royal edict, executive order, all women are to treat their husbands with respect. That's what the king is ordering 127 provinces. Rav Soloveitchik says this was powerful because it sent a message to the people that this king is a nut. That no matter what your politics is on Biden, Obama, Trump, Bush, you make policy. And you may feel the policy is wrong. You may be Republican and not like the Obama, Biden. You may say these are foolish policies. Or you may be a Democrat and not like the Bush and Trump policies and say these are bad executive orders. But at least in their foundational principal part, it's an executive order, an energy policy, economy, I don't know. But to issue a national order that Trump or Biden or Obama or Bush is going to send out an order, all wives have to treat their husbands with respect, or the other way around. It's beneath the office. and this is very powerful, it's Rav Soloveitchik's insight, because later Haman is going to convince King Achashverosh to issue an executive order that on such and such day the Jews are to be killed, which, thank God, thanks to the miracle of what's going to unfold with Esther and Mordechai, that'll be overcome. But in terms of its initial impact, none of the anti-Semites of the day suddenly began attacking Jews, nor did they start stocking up with weapons to attack Jews, because they still remembered from that crazy edict that wives need to treat husbands with respect, that this guy with his executive orders, you can't count on it. You don't know what he's talking about. He's a little bit nuts, and you never know when he issues an order if it's logical, thought out, or whether he's drunk today. And no one wants to tell him he's drunk because then they'll have the guy killed. So that's another powerful aspect of chapter 1. And that brings us now into chapter 2, and let's move forward. The background was so important because only by understanding the fullness of the historic relationship we had with Babylonia, her fall, and the division to Medea and Persia, do we better appreciate how evil Achashverosh was. Again, remembering he is the one during that period who would not let us rebuild the temple. Once Babylonia fell, and Nebuchadnezzar, Evil-Merodach, and Belshazzar no longer were king, Darius and Cyrus opened up rebuilding the temple. And Jews came back after only 70 years exile. Now, in exile, 70 years is a long time. Don't get me wrong. But 70 years comes to an end. The Holocaust ended, what, 1945? Certainly World War II and the Holocaust. And we're just about at 70 years. We're past it. From 1945, the year 2015 was 70 years. We are more than 70 years past the Holocaust. As powerful as the Shoah is and was, you begin to see how it's weakening now. Now it's kind of not what it was. After the Holocaust, there was a period of 10, 20 years. People felt for the Jews. People understood what concentration camps were. Now they talk about the Holocaust left and right. Every time you don't like somebody, it's Holocaust. Okay? This stuff with whether people should wear masks because of the pandemic and whether they should get injections and the immunizations, and whether the government should have authority to impose by health law that everybody should be immunized, or whether the government should not do it but should be persuasive. This is politics. But it's extraordinarily striking how many people are walking around saying, oh, this is Nazis. You're coercing me to get a shot. This is like the Nazis. No, not really. There's a difference let's say you really, really, really don't believe in those shots, and you don't want to get it, whether it's Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson. You really don't want the government forcing you to have a shot. I don't care how deeply you feel. That's not the same as being divided, men and women, and the women and the children are going into ovens. They're going to go into showers where Zyklon B is going to come down, gas them to death. Then their dead bodies are going to be taken to crematoria where they're going to be burned, where they're going to then take Jews who are being held as themselves slaves to clear out the crematoria and take the remains and put them in mass graves. No, that's not the same as being forced against your will to get a Moderna shot. It may be un-American, depending on your politics. I personally have had the 2 shots in the booster. Maybe, as says Denise, maybe you haven't, and that's okay. I'm not getting into the politics. But the idea of comparing that to the Nazis, so you see, after 70 years, things changed. So what happened was Darius the first and Cyrus Koresh allowed the Jews after 70 years to come back to Eretz Israel and rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. And Achashverosh put a red light on it. He was a bad guy. And it's very different from the Achashverosh that you infer from the story, where it's like he's not a bad guy. He's jolly old King Achashverosh, and he just can't hold his wine. Okay, so we continue. And ironically, as we said, it was a son who allowed us to rebuild. So we get into this going forward as we hit chapter 2. Achar hadavarim ha'ela, Kishocha matamelach hamelch Hashverosh Zachart vashtivit asher asata b'et asher nixar olah. Sometime afterwards, he calmed down. The Talmud tells us 3 years. Not that he remained drunk for 3 years, but after 3 years, he got lonely. He found after 3 years, yeah, he has a harem. Yeah, he has women all over the place. But he doesn't have an intimate. By intimate here, we mean an emotional intimate, beyond the physical intimate. After 3 years, he's really feeling lonely. And he realizes, I miss Vashti. I like the way she used to yell and scream at me every night, always disagree with me, burn dinner, I don't know. I miss her. I want a wife. And he mentions it, and his advisors, they see he's pouting. So they say you should have a beauty contest. Why don't you go and have a beauty contest of all the women in the kingdom? And again, Tovot Mareh is telling us the idea of beautiful in the Hebrew. The suggestion is you'll see them with clothes and without clothes. And you'll pick a number one. And they should be ideally betulot, virgins. You know, in the Middle East, that's particularly praised. You want a virgin, whatever. V'yafkeda melech bekidim, b'chol medinot malchuto, v'yikbetzu et kol na'ara betula tovat mareh, el shushan habira. So you should, by command of the king, coercively, every single woman who is a virgin, who is not married, because in Persia in those days, a woman who was not married was a virgin. People did not do like today, where they sleep together in public and they post it on Facebook. It was, I remember, it's an embarrassment for, you know, if you're raised in a religious community, if you're living and you're not married together, a little bit of modesty, a little bit of privacy. The idea of just posting on Facebook with someone that you're not married to, here we went here and there, it's really not nice. So back then, they're saying you'll gather all the virgins, El Beit Hanashim, El Yad Hega, Sris Hamelech Shomer Nashim. There's a guy named Hega. Hega. And Hega was eunuchized, if there's such a verb. He had let's say a bris to the max, and they made him a eunuch, and he was in charge of women. That in the kingdom, any virgin who was not accounted for, let's say an orphan woman, they had a house of women. And if you ever saw the movie, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, the movie with Zero Mostel and stuff, you know, like a house of women, the one that Phil Silvers has in that movie. So Hage's in charge, and V'naton Tamrukehen, you should put out a public announcement. All virgins, by order of the king, are to leave wherever in the kingdom, 127 provinces. You go to Hage's domain, where he will supervise. There will be one heck of a beauty contest, whereby every single night, another woman will be assigned to spend the night in the royal palace, and you can connect those dots until the king finds the right one. And that one will replace Vashti. And the king agreed and decided to do that. And for the last part of today's class, next week we'll get into the beauty contest and all the additions that the rabbis bring. But now, getting for the first time, the story introduces us to Mordechai. And let's see what the story tells us about him, so we can conclude with some interesting rabbinic insights, going beyond the text itself. Ish Yehudi. Now, a Yehudi is a Jew. Simply, in modern day Hebrew as well, I am a Yehudi. I'm a Jew. The word Yehudi, as a Hebrew word, that's what it means. But it also means someone from the tribe of Judah. There are 12 tribes, or 13 we spoke about at the beginning of class, one of which is Yehuda. Yehuda is the fourth son of Leah. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. There was Reuben, Simon, Levi, and Judah. These are the four oldest. And only when Leah stopped giving birth during the first time around did Rachel first interpose her maid, Bilhah, who gave birth to Dan and Naphtali, and then Leah had her maid, Zilpah, gave birth to Gad and Asher, and then later Leah gave birth, again resumed Yisachar, Zvulun, finally Rachel, Yosef, and Binyamin. But Yehud is part of the original four. And Yaakov on his deathbed had stated that the leaders of Israel will come from the tribe of Yehuda. So, for example, King David is from the tribe of Yehuda. King Saul, the first king, is from Benjamin, and that's why that dynasty did not continue, because it was not Judean. It was not from Yehuda. It was from Benjamin. But Benjamin was the alternative. Okay. Ish Yehudi, a Jew, possibly meaning a man of the tribe of Judah, Hayah b'Shushan Habira, lived among all the other Jews who were living at that time in the capital city. Jews often end up in the capital city. Here in the United States, where do Jews live? Jews are identified with New York City, Los Angeles, even cities like Boston, Chicago. Jews congregate in big cities. Lots of reasons. Practical reasons, kosher food. If you're living out in the sticks in Montana and in Idaho, there's not enough Jews in any one community to make it commercially feasible for a guy to open up a kosher butcher store. Even here in Orange County, to open up one kosher butcher store for the entire county of 100,000 Jews, OC Kosher. So he's based, let's say, in Tustin, because he has to be able to be reachable. The only way he can make a go of it is that the Jews of South County, Irvine, Laguna, this, Laguna, that, and North County, up in Tustin, Yorba Belinda, everybody's got to have access. So there's a Jew in the capital city. His name is Mordechai. Now, there's something interesting about the name Mordechai. It happens to be that the Babylonians believed primarily in two gods. The two gods of, modern day America, the two main religions you have are the different Christian religions, Catholicism, Protestantism, they believe in Jesus. And Mohammedans, the Muslims believe in Muhammad. Okay. The Babylonians believed in Marduk and Ishtar. Marduk, M-A-R-T-U-K, if you wrote it in English, and Ishtar, I-S-H-T-A-R. And the rabbis notice that the heroes of our story are Mordechai and Esther. Marduk, Ishtar. In other words, Jews were really, really assimilated. Jews living in Persia at that time were not necessarily walking around with names like Chaim and like Mushka and, Menachem Mendel and, Chana, Leah, Rachel. They were walking around with names like Scott, Todd, Brian, the latest names, Jewel, Tiffany. I mean, when you hear these names, what kind of Jewish names are they? You have people named Tiffany, and the Hebrew name is Chaim Mushka. It's like nobody knows the Hebrew names unless they're in shul. 99% of Jews don't know the names. No one knows this more than a rabbi, God forbid. Someone comes and says, could you say a prayer? The person's sick. Sure, what's the Hebrew name? I don't know the name. And they give you English names. It's a real problem. So the Jews were so assimilated that even their leaders had names like Mary and the kinds of names you expect from Goyim now. Okay, so his name is Mordechai. He's Mordechai the Jew, possibly from the tribe of Judah. Ben Yair ben Shim'i, his father and grandfather, ben Kish ish Yemini. He goes back 3 generations. Yemini, the rabbis tell us that's the name for people from Benjamin. What's the Hebrew name Benjamin? It's actually Binyamin. Binyamin is the Hebrew name that the King James Version calls Benjamin. Binyamin, people from Binyamin are known as Yeminis. It's like, why aren't they known as Binyaminis? Too many syllables. It's like, you have to know how you refer to people from a place. It's a thing. If you come from California, you know. You're a Californian. That's easy. And what if you're from Los Angeles? Are you a Los Angelinian? No. You have to know. You're an Angelino. It's a certain term. And what if you're from Michigan? Does that make you a Michiganer? Think about it. He's a Michiganer from Michigan. You have to know. If you're from Michigan, you're Michiganian. I don't know, Michigan. So you're Michigan. I don't know. I got to look it up. There was a big thing. You should just know. There's a big thing that someone's running for Congress. You know, they're starting to gear up for November already. So they're running for Congress, and one side is the congressional representative seeking re-election, and the other one's the insurgent running against. So the insurgent running against sent out a tweet a week ago to people in that district. We New Yorkians are going to show so-and-so. And with that one tweet, the person basically destroyed her candidacy because the representative who's sitting in office then tweeted back, this carpetbagger from outside New York doesn't even know that New Yorkers are called New Yorkers. She's calling us New Yorkians. What can show you better how little she knows about who we are? So you got to know. There's a way to call people New Yorkians. New Yorkians. Michiganer at least makes sense. So he's a Yemini. He's from Benjamin. But I thought you said he's from Yehuda. So the Gemara talks about it. Which is he, Benjamin or Yehuda? And the obvious answer is one of his 2 parents was from Judah, and the other parent was from Benjamin. And the Gemara talks about it in greater detail than we have in the text. Anytime something bad happened, what was something bad that Mordechai caused? He refused to bow down to Haman. Since he refused to bow down to Haman, Haman decreed through the king, all the Jews should be killed. So the Gemara says, when the Jews got in trouble because of Mordechai, everybody from the tribe of Judah blamed Benjamin. It's your guy that screwed it up for everybody. And Benjamin blamed Yehuda. No, actually, it was your guy that screwed it up. By the end of the book, where Mordechai and Esther turned it all around, and Mordechai, through his wisdom and counsel, the next thing you know, Haman's getting. So Benjamin's saying, see, he's our guy. We told you so. And Judah said, no, you said he isn't your guy. You said he's our guy. We never said that. Oh, we never said that. So that's people. So he's from both Yehuda and Binyamin. And in wrapping it up and bringing an interesting insight, they point out there's something unique to Benjamin, to Binyamin. Of the 12 sons of Yaakov, only one of them never bowed down. What am I talking about? When Yaakov had fled his parents, Yitzchak and Rivka, because Esav, his brother, wanted to kill him, Yaakov had fled at his parents' behest, all the way east to Babylonia, as it is, towards back to Haran, where the family started, to Lavan, his mother Rivka's brother, his uncle Lavan, where he met Rachel and Leah, married Rachel and Leah. And he had 11 children. He had all his children except for Benjamin. And when Rachel finally gave birth to Yosef, he got up and with the two wives and the two the associate wives with Zilpah and Bilhah, along with Leah and Rachel, and the 11 boys and Dinah, the girl, and they fled Lavan, and they came back to Eretz Israel. And then they, of course, had the encounter with Esav as they were coming back. Esav shows up with his 400 men on horseback soldiers, and Yaakov was afraid that night that tomorrow they might all get slaughtered. That was the night that he wrestled with God's angel, and he prayed to God, and God taught him, you no longer call yourself Yaakov, you'll be called Yisrael, and you'll stand up to him tomorrow. The morrow came. Esav shows up with his army of 400 men, and the Torah tells us everybody bowed down to him. Yaakov bowed down, the 4 wives backed down, the 11 sons bowed down. The only one who did not bow down was the one who was not yet born. That was Benjamin. And then later in the story, as they continue on to Eretz Israel, Rachel goes into labor outside Ephrat, where she gives birth to Binyamin, but dies in childbirth, and is buried in Bethlehem in Bethlehem. So the rabbis say it's interesting, the only one of the children who never bowed down to a human being was Benjamin. Mordechai would not bow down. He had a tradition, we Benjaminites do not bow down to human beings. Interesting. Of course, nowadays, it's part and parcel of Jewish practice. It's a hallmark of Judaism. We do not bow down. There's images, of course, of Christians bowing in their church, getting on their knees. And the Muslims, that's the hallmark of their prayer, that they go and they all prostrate themselves. In fact, the Hebrew word for a mosque is a miskad, which is a miskad, they who prostrate and bow. Jews, by contrast, don't. Finally, last pasuk of the day, Asher hagla mirushalayim im hagola, Asher haglata im Yechanya melech Yehuda, Asher hagla Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel. Kish, that is Mordechai's, the son of Yair, the grandson of Shimei, and the great-grandson of Kish, Yair, Shimei, Kish. His great-grandfather, Kish, had been exiled from Jerusalem 70 years earlier with the Heglah of Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel, the exile by Nebuchadnezzar. And so he now found himself in Persia, 3rd generation. That means he probably, just like we who already are 2nd and 3rd generation American, we already do not have a Yiddish accent, Polish, Russian accent. We speak like Americans. We're Americans through and through. So in the same way, he's an assimilated, he's not so assimilated he's given up his Judaism, but he's got a name like Mordechai. It's like Tiffany and Scott. Just utterly names with no Jewish link whatsoever. He's thoroughly imbued and part of the Persian culture. And he's there. And he's the leader of the Jews at that time. And here's where we leave off, Esther chapter 2, verse 7 for next week. As always, at this point, I stop the